Hi, I'm Adam Clay, Head of Technical at NWF. I'm just going to take a few minutes of your time to talk about maize. So firstly, when do we harvest? Now ideally a maize crop wants to be 32 to 35% dry matter, but doing a pre-cut analysis isn't as easy as it is in grass silage to determine the dry matter, so we have to then look at the grain. Now when we look at the grain, we're looking at the milk line. So we're going to look from the outside of the grain into the base of the grain to determine where that milk line is. It goes from a pale white milky colour down to quite a deep dark yellow colour, and that's laying starch down into the maize grain, which is what we want in a maize crop. Now ideally you're looking for that milk line to be around about half to 2/3 of the way down to the base of the grain. That should give you a 32 to 35% starch maize crop, which is really what you want to be targeting. Now as we get closer down to the base of the grain and that milk line goes further down, the starch becomes tighter and more bound, so processing becomes more and more important. Every grain should be at least half chopped to open that grain up and let the bacteria in the rumen get to it. But the tighter that starch becomes and the further the milk line works its way down, the more and more important that is. So actually ideally you want maize processing to be split 4 ways. So that grain wants to be split in 4 parts ideally, if you can get it that way. So if you harvest your maize in drier conditions, if the dry matter is higher or it's a more mature crop, then you'll have good starch levels, but it just means that less of that starch is available in the rumen. It's still there for the cow, but it's more available in the intestine. Now that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it just means you have to manage your supplementation a bit more accurately. Same can go with ensiling times. After 50 days of ensiling, about 70% of the maize starch is available for the rumen. The rest of it's still there, but it's available in the intestine. 150 days into ensiling, 85 to 90% of the maize is available in the rumen, so far less in the intestine. It just means you have to manage your supplementation more accurately. So if less is available in the rumen, so that's drier crops and more mature crops, then you need to use rumen available energy sources like molasses, maize sugar, wheat or barley. If you're after about 150 days of ensiling, more of it is available in the rumen, which means now you need to use energy sources such as maize starch or protected wheat like Ultra Starch W, and that puts more of that energy in the intestine, so it helps balance that out. So from a processing perspective, chop length. Chop length wants to be about 1 to 2 centimetres. Simple as that. Most important thing is that it's homogeneous, it's consistent. That will help packing density in the clamp. Most important thing with maize is that you get that oxygen out of that clamp to help the stability of it. It also helps you during feed out as well. At feed out, that means that you get less sorting at the trough phase, so a homogeneous cut is very, very important. Use an additive. So front-end fermentation is still important for maize silage, but it is easier. With the lower protein in maize silage, it's easier to get that front-end ferment, but with so much energy in the crop, it's difficult to keep that back-end stability. So make sure you use a silage additive that's got enzymes in it that help digestibility, and it's got a brevis bacteria in there that helps that back-end stability and survivability in the clamp. Finally, feed out. So at feed out, you're bringing in a new crop with different starch degradabilities in the rumen or in the intestine. I always like to use at least a rumen buffer, or ideally a yeast, at least a couple of months before, or a month or 2 before the introduction of the maize, and a month or 2 after the introduction of the maize as well, just to help that transition in the rumen and help the rumen bacteria cope with that varying level of supply of starch in there. Any questions on the topics that I've discussed about and want to go into more detail, if you want any more content, then please don't hesitate to ask an NWF specialist.